Hey guys, welcome to Lifepoint Church Online. My name is Steph and we're so glad to have you with us for another Sunday. Today we have guest preacher Michael Gilliver speaking to us. We're going through our Thinking Faith series and he's going to be speaking to us about meaning. How our faith gives us a purpose, a meaning that can't be taken away. A meaning like nothing else. Thanks, Michael.
And hello to the people tuning in. Apparently that's a thing online now that we're live filming. But this is a live audience, so I'm going to talk to you and hopefully it will translate to whoever's at home. Dan's given me enough of an intro, so I'm just going to launch in. If this is your first time at church, we do a talk. It's a way of kind of trying to understand God a little bit. And hopefully this will be of value to you. And a good way to start is with a bit of a story. I'm quite old now. That's the thing I've come to realise. I turned 40 this year, which is terrifying. At some point soon, I better start acting like an adult. I'll hold off as long as I possibly can. But some point between getting married and now, a weird thing happened in my brain that I hate to tell you, other men in the room and young men in the room, that one day this will be true of you. You will one day also care about your lawn. There's this thing outside your house called grass. I don't know if you're aware of this, but there's actually many different types of grass. I didn't know there was many types of grass until quite recently. I thought basically there was the thick stuff and the thin stuff. It's not as simple as that. There's everything in between. And when we moved into the property we live in, my wife and I and kids, we live in Marumba Downs, the grass was pretty average. And so literally for like the last 10 years, I've been gradually trying to improve that lawn so that when people drive past it, they're impressed with me. I don't know if that's I've not achieved that yet, I can tell you now. One of the ways you do it is you fertilise a lot. Okay, that's one of the critical measures. But the other one, and men, again, take notes if you're not aware of this, is you need to use chemicals. I know that's a scary thing, but in order to get rid of the foreign invading species and keep the one that you want, you need to use selective herbicides. That is, it kills one type of thing, but not the other type of thing. And there's one particular type of grass that's the worst. You're all learning so much today, I can tell. It's called papsilum, I think. I don't know how to pronounce it correctly. But it's really hard to kill. It's one of those ones that there is a selective herbicide that can kill it, but if you get the measurements just like a smidgen wrong, you have what's happened here, is that you just kill all the grass around it as well. And for those of you who are playing at home, if you look really close, there's like a little nugget right in the middle. Can you see that? That means I've also got armyworms at the moment, which is just like doubly bad. Two problematic things. Now that's just one small patch of the accidental poisoning of the actual grass, not just the weed that I've done. But if you went to the front of my house, you would see about a 3 by 7 metre block where there was lots of papsilum and I sprayed the stuff and it killed everything. So it's just all dead now. So I've totally stuffed it. But anyway, that's life sometimes, right? You go in with a plan and then you end up with unintended consequences. You didn't mean for B to happen. You were going for A, but turns out you got B as well. And in our talk today, we're going to talk a bit about an unintended consequence that has occurred as a result of what people believe about God. Because anyone here would know, I'm sure, you've probably got a friend somewhere. You might be sitting next to them, and if you're not sitting next to anyone, I hope there's someone in your life who's your friend, right? And maybe that person is not a believer, right? And that's fine. There's people in the world who don't believe in God, and they've got lots of reasons for why that has happened to become the case. But this, what we're talking about today, is probably not the reason they stopped being a Christian or stopped believing in God. This is an unintended consequence of not believing in God. It's like when I looked at, science, or they looked at the behaviour of Christians that they knew, or I don't know, there's potentially lots of reasons, the nature of truth, all these things, and they came to the conclusion there's either no God or there probably is no God, and therefore I don't believe. And then as an unintended consequence of that belief, they then now struggle with the idea of meaning. So no one went into the I'm going to abandon God conversation and went, what I really want is a meaningless life. I'm really hoping that all the meaning goes away and that's why I'm going to stop believing in God. People don't go in with that. But if you take God off the table, if this life is all there is, then meaning does become a problem. And so the approach I want to take today in our Thinking Faith series is to really try and build a bit of a bridge between those who believe and those who don't with regards to the issue of meaning. Because I've sat in these talks before, and something that sometimes happens, never here, because we are amazing, of course, but sometimes it gets a bit adversarial. It gets a bit like the Christians are looking at the non-Christians and going, ha ha, you don't have it, you're wrong, ha ha. And the other camp looking at the Christians going, ha ha, you're stupid, ha ha. We're not going to do that today, because no one went into the meaning conversation with the intention of harming and hurting their opponent, right? This is not a conversation between adversaries. And if I do my job well today, what I'll hope is that if you are a believer, you will hear how people who aren't for meaning, and you'll recognise that that makes sense. And if you are not a believer, that you would leave today and you think, that's why those Christian folks think they have meaning. That we would just kind of come to this understanding of where we're both at in the meaning conversation. And I must admit, if we could go to the next slide, that I am kind of presuming that meaning is an issue. That there's something inbuilt into the human race that wants meaning. That it's almost like just an unsubstantiated, just a natural truth, that meaning is a thing. Part of my role is I go into schools and I talk to their principals and deputies and their heads of department, and I talk them through how to get the most out of their team, right? Like how to lead people. And a lot of the best literature on this now about how to get the most out of your team. And if you lead a team, you might have read this book. There's lots of books like it. But that meaning has become a bit of a thing in the kind of organisational psychology in the human leadership world. Here's a quote from one book that I particularly like. It's a good one if you're looking for one, The 9 Lies About Work. And Marcus Buckingham says this: our prevailing assumption is that we need goals because our deficit at work is a deficit of aligned action. We're mistaken. So the premise of the book is, here's things that organisations do all the time to try and improve productivity, and here's why 9 of those things are wrong. One of those things that don't improve your productivity at work is having your boss force you to come up with a goal for the year, right? Turns out that has very limited impact on your productivity. What does, however, he goes on, we're mistaken about action. Next slide, please. What we face instead is a deficit of meaning. And so if that is what people need to be more productive, then the role of the leader is quite obvious. Next slide. Of a clear and detailed understanding of the purpose of our work and of the values we should honour in deciding how to get it done. Our people don't need to be told what to do, they want to be told why. And so part of a leader's job, it turns out, in an organisation is they have to be in charge of finding the meaning. And that's not had any controversy. It's like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Whether you're a believer or not a believer, people hear and go, yes, that sounds fair enough. It sounds like meaning is an important thing, and if we want to be enjoying our work and doing it well, we probably need to know what the meaning of that work is. So it's a given fact. People want meaning. But if you take God off the table, can you have it? And the big question of why life, is there a response without God? And I want to clearly say to you, the answer is yes. Okay? I know that might not be where you're thinking. It's always... we're all like, yeah, no, the Christians have meaning and the non-Christians don't. No, actually. There are people who are not believers who have lived incredibly meaningful lives, and we don't want to take that away from them. I was watching a movie last night, The Trial of the Chicago 7. Quality movie if you're looking for something on Netflix, by the way. And I don't know if any of these people had faith or not, but they made a difference. They stood up for something and it was really important. Probably those people, that was a true story, but the real versions of them will have a much more meaningful life in some regard than I ever will. And so we don't want to take that away. What instead we want to do is understand where they draw their meaning from. And this is not me talking. I'm simply going to take a bunch of the literature I've read on what people use to find meaning if you take God off the table. Here's way number 1. And this might be helpful because you'll think of the people in your life who don't believe, or maybe you here don't yourself, and I think, yes, that's me. That's how I do it. Option number 1 is pursue reasonable pleasure. So the idea of this particular worldview is that if life is short, it might as well be happy. If I'm not going to be here for very long, I don't want to be sad, so I should pursue the things in my life that are likely to result in the most amount of joy I can achieve. Importantly, with regards to that, it's reasonable pleasure, because there's a bit of a mindset here that if you pursue any particular pleasure too much, it will become painful. So we need to not go too extreme. Like having a glass of wine is great. Having 35 glasses of wine will cause pain. And this isn't a new idea. I'm sure it's probably been the case of humanity since, humans start showing up on Earth. But it was made probably most famous in actual writing around 350 BC. There's this author, ancient philosopher named Epicurus, and he came up with this belief system called Epicureanism. You might have heard someone say at some point, and if you haven't, that rule when you learn a new word, suddenly it appears in your life. It's Epicurean, which means it's full of the fine things in life. That's where that idea comes from. If you haven't read Epicurus, and you probably haven't, maybe your parents have given you The Barefoot Investor, and you've read that instead, right? That book there is this, because it's about finding that moderate place in the middle of your life where you are saving the right amount but also spending the right amount so you're living an enjoyable life from now to the end. It says things like, get a really nice pillow. That's one of the pieces of advice from The Barefoot Investor. And some people have read it and they know the part I'm talking about, right? That's in there. Because if you're going to have to sleep, you might as well have an enjoyable sleep. Barefoot Investor, that is what reasonable pleasure looks like. If life's going to be short, it might as well be fun. The second way people pursue a meaningful life, if you take God off the table, is you pursue disciplined victory. This has become quite popular recently, probably most famous in the writings of kind of the new, most influential male thought leader at the moment, Jordan Peterson. He's got his book, 12 Rules for Life. I got to about the 10th rule. It got a bit boring, to be honest, but he's quite, when he speaks, he's easy to listen to. He's always got interesting things to say. And he's very, very widely listened to. And his basic view is that if life is hard, which he agrees it is, and we all know it is, right? Then we must approach it with a sense of bravery, a sense of duty. If life is a battle, we might as well try and win. And the way to win is to work hard. One of the famous chapters of his book is if you want to change the world, first clean up your room. The idea being that you first take control of what's in your nearest circle of influence and then gradually expand over time. This, interestingly again, is not a new idea. Rewind back to around 350 BC, there was a thought leader back then who came up with it. His name was Zeno, which is a great name. And the particular belief system, he didn't call it Zenoism, missed opportunity. He called it Stoicism, or being a Stoic. And there's, if you know your How to Train a Dragon, there's like a king in there named Stoic the Wise, and he is brave and does the right thing, and he leaves his pleasures aside to pursue what's right for the greater cause. That is what it means to be a Stoic. Someone who says, if life's a battle, I will fight hard. I will be disciplined because I want to win. That's the option number 2. I've lived a great life. I live a meaningful life because I do the right thing and I sacrifice where I need to. The third way that people live in order to have meaning without God is they pursue enduring legacy. If life is going to be short, then I want to leave something behind when I go. I want to have made a difference that continues after my life is finished. You probably have heard someone say this to some effect. In terms of literature, this is what you find in most biographies of famous people who've done great things. This is the lens that they explain their meaning through. They lived a meaningful life because of the things they left behind. Often things that they did not see the success of in their lifetime, but things that push things along in a certain direction, and we only got to there because that person sacrificed so much for a greater cause. And it can be a cause. It can also be relationships. So sometimes the way people pursue this particular one is they love their family or their children in a particular way, and then that's the legacy they leave on. And then the fourth one, which is the one that I think is probably the one that really describes our world today, is pick any of them as long as you pick it. With the key part being that you choose your meaning. And what then therefore happens is that this kind of becomes a Sizzler's smorgasbord, and you get to pick a bit of that and a lot of this and maybe some of that at some times. And you get to do the picking. And which one you pick, it doesn't really matter. The point is that you picked it. There was a book written recently, I think it's called Untamed, by someone whose name I can't remember this second. But Adele loved it. I remember that part because she's famous. And she wrote the blurb on the back, right, saying, read this book, it's so great. And the blurb basically says how to find joy by ignoring everyone around you. It's like how to escape the expectations of others, and in that doing so, you will find true freedom and therefore true meaning. I think that in many ways is what I see in the world a lot of today, is that people will say, well, just do what's right for you. That's kind of the models. And can I just say, if you choose to live through any of those, you could live a really meaningful life. You could make a difference. You could leave a legacy. You could win the battle of life. You could live a relatively happy and pain-free life. You could have those things, and we don't want to take anything away from that. There are people greater than any of us here who don't believe in God, who live through one of the or more of these lenses and end up living quite a meaningful life. So let's not be in the business of making mockery of people's meaning, because they're pretty good actually, but there are some problems with them. There are some problems, and the problems that I'm going to identify here aren't problems I came up with. I didn't sit in a corner for a while and think, how am I going to poke holes in these arguments? These are just what people who wrote about these say are the problems with their own belief systems. So the people who came up with these as the way of framing it then go on and say, but here are some problems with this way of living, just so you know. I've got 4 of them for you. We were talking in 4s today. Problems with meaning from within, number 1, is the problem of subjectivity. And that is that my one and your one are both equally valid, so which is the right one? That becomes a problem, particularly when in your life you have competing priorities. I could give up for this cause, so that maybe legacy is the thing, but that's going to be painful, so I'm going to lose the pleasure part. And then at the same time, I want to do the right thing, and the right thing is hard, and I'll possibly lose both in the context of that. So which is the right one? And the answer is, well, you just pick whichever one's right for you. Like, it's actually, when we're talking about meaning, not having some idea of here is the scorecard, here's the right way, and just having to pick it for ourselves makes it quite difficult. We're never quite sure which is the right one. We're always just giving it our best go. And therefore, we always have in the back of our mind, what if I got it wrong? What if that pathway I picked was not the pathway to maximum meaning? What have I missed out on? And FOMO kicks in. Problem number 2 is the problem of, thank you, vulnerability, which is that each of these meaning frames are actually quite easy to destroy. They're quite vulnerable. If you are pursuing pleasure as the way to know you've lived a meaningful life, then all that has to happen is something really unpleasurable, and now your meaning is gone. And to be honest, the older you get, the more unpleasurable things start happening. And so anyone who's pursuing that life path is guaranteed to hit that hurdle at some point. It's like, this life doesn't feel all that pleasurable anymore. Does that now make my life meaningless? Similarly, if you are devoting your life to a cause, what happens if that cause turned out to be wrong? What if you put all this effort and energy into something and then it withers away and didn't leave an enduring legacy? Is your life now meaningless? The problem with that some of these ways of living is that they're quite easy for the world to defeat by circumstances completely outside of your control. You might do the right thing time and time again, and you get rewarded with punishment time and time again. That people hit you, and it never seemed to see a victory. You don't win. Does that mean your life was meaningless? It's a tough one. Now, the third way that there's a problem with this way of living is the problem of privilege, which is that these viewpoints on how to live your life tend to only come up in Western democracies or wealthy countries. For the majority of the world, they're just trying to eat this week. They're trying to get through the next 7 days. They're trying to be safe. And yet here we are, deep inside our own psyche, trying to work out all these big things that for most of the world are completely irrelevant and not even on the table. And does that therefore mean that meaning can only be found in the wealthy people? And the last problem, there's 4 of them, is the problem of irrelevance, which is basically this. A moment ago we had a greeting time. Imagine if the greeting time, you were supposed to say to the person you were greeting, can you tell me about your great-great-great-great-grandfather, please? And I'm pretty confident that none of you could tell us anything about them. But here's the sad news. One day you will be a great-great-great-grandfather and no one will be able to tell a story about you. Or you'll be a great-great-great-great-grandmother and no one will know your name. And maybe at some point the whole world's going to blow up anyway and it's really going to be irrelevant, isn't it? That in an ultimate sense, no matter which one you pick, if you take God off the table and if this life is all there is, at the end of it all, it kind of doesn't matter which one you did at all. And this is not me pointing these things out. These are the philosophers themselves. And so this is their advice. I think this is fantastic because it's so honest. That's what I like about really good philosophers, is they do follow through on what their belief system actually means. So this is what they basically say, is that if you think about this meaning too much, then you're going to feel down and overcome. If you take it all to its logical conclusion, it's going to cause you to get really down on yourself and get real sad. And here's some quotes, just so you know I'm not making this up. Here's Thomas Nagel, famous philosopher. Here's his advice. He says, well, only by breaking with the whole notion of deep meaning, which will always tempt us, can be free. I run a lot of professional learning sessions with teachers, and there's always someone in the room who questions the question, you know, those annoying people. He's basically doing that. He's saying, well, maybe we shouldn't even be looking for meaning. If we just took meaning off the table, then we wouldn't feel so bad about not having one. So that's what we should do. And this quote, here's a letter written in the 1930s. He's a justice in America writing to another guy about the idea of meaning. And he says this, when one thinks coldly, I see no reason for attributing to a man a significance different in kind from that which belongs to a baboon or a grain of sand. So when you think about it enough, and if matter is all there is, then really what's the difference between a human and an animal and a mineral, really? If it all is going to end in the end anyway. And so his advice in this letter he was writing to a friend to help them figure out what to do with their life, here's his advice. If I start to think that way too much, the time approaches when I just go downstairs and play solitaire. If I think about it too much, I might as well just go and play cards because thinking too much makes me feel down. And so that's the problem of this particular viewpoint, right? Is you can get meaning. You can actually live quite a meaningful life, but it is within certain boundaries. It's only so far that it can go. And that's why when Christians look at it, they have a bit of a different mindset. And they go, well, we look at it in a different way. Because if you put God back on the table, and if this life isn't all there is, then there's some other things that you can get. There's some other meanings that can come. And the most important part of this is there's a complete reversal of the mindset, in that if you feel down and overcome, then the call for Christians, because you might be feeling down and overcome, right? That happens. And the goal for Christians is to think about meaning more. Not to think less so you feel less overcome, but when you are overcome, to think about meaning more. I want to tell you one quick story from the Bible about a guy reflecting on his meaning. And I hope from that, where you're at with your life, where you're starting to think, what the heck is the point of all this? This may be helpful. This is from a letter. If you don't know the Bible very well, the Bible isn't one book, it's a lot of little books. And some of those books are letters. This one's written by the Apostle Paul. And there's a photo of him I took a little while ago. That's actually from a film, I think it's called The Apostle Paul or something like that. And I love their portrayal of him actually, because I reckon Paul would have looked like a rough dude. He lived a really tough life actually. If you follow his biography historically, he went through hard things. So I reckon he'd kind of look a bit like this. Anyway, towards the end of his life, and I'm not a biblical historian, but I think this is how it kind of went down. He was arrested and put in jail, probably in house arrest. That was the common way for people to be imprisoned, if it could be done that way. And in this letter, it's the second letter he wrote to a guy named Timothy, but it was written in a way that it was intended to be published, so everyone would read it, but it was written to a particular audience. And I know that sounds weird as a genre of writing, but it was really common in ancient times for people to write letters and then publish them. And not just Christian people, like non-Christian people wrote letters all the time and published them. Pliny wrote heaps of them, and they're quite good. So it's not uncommon for that to have been a thing. This is the second letter he wrote, and it's the last thing he wrote. And what happened next to Paul is two probable things. One is he could have been killed by the Emperor Nero. So Nero went on a bit of a Christian killing spree at a point within his reign. Basically, Rome burnt down. There you go, the Great Fire of Rome. And he needed a scapegoat, so he just blamed Christians and killed a bunch of them. And it's possible that was where Paul died during that purge. But it's also possible he just died of illness or something. We don't really know. What's interesting in this particular letter is that it's clear Paul knows that he's going to die soon. And so he's writing in here words that you probably would, start to ponder too if you're on your kind of deathbed and you're like, well, what was the meaning of all this? We get an insight into a Christian, one of the first true Christian people, right? The most influential Christian writer of all time. You say, well, Jesus is the most influential, but he didn't write any books, right? Paul is probably the most influential guy in terms of explaining Christian theology. And here is him trying to figure out meaning while he's about to die. And the things that he draws on to give him a sense of meaning, I think are really helpful for us as we try to wrestle with meaning. So here's the first part. He says, "For I'm already being poured out like a drink offering, and the time for my departure is near." You see, there's that language, like he knows it's going to end sometime soon. And then there's this beautiful metaphor here that I think is so helpful for finding meaning in the Christian faith. He says, "I have fought the good fight, I have finished the race, I have kept the faith." Those metaphors are chosen very purposefully. Paul was not the sort of person that misused words. He's very intentional in what he wants you to think of. And the thing about races and fights is there is an element of that is imposed externally upon you. So if we had the Olympics and it was a time for the 100-metre dash and everyone got to run whatever pathway they wanted, we wouldn't really be able to measure fairly who went there fastest, right? The way a race works is you're given a lane to run in. And you don't make the lane up yourself, something else gives you the lane. If you are fighting the air, if there's nothing to fight, you are not fighting anything, you're a weirdo. The nature of a fight is you are fighting against something else that has been put there. And so for Paul, what he is saying here is, as I try to make sense of the meaning for my life, he is saying, I see behind me and in front of me, however short the in front of me is left, a purposeful placing by something else that I am supposed to do. The section before it, he kind of talks in a bit more practical about what he's been doing. And what's Paul like doing? He loves preaching and writing. And he's recommending to Timothy that he do the same, basically, because that's Paul's unique gifting. He was a real smart dude, could write really well, could speak really well. And for you, that might be your thing too. But the point being that God has given you whatever you need to run the race that he has put before you. That there's something about the way that he made you intentionally. This is what Christians believe, right? That says, I have these particular abilities, I have these particular circumstances, and I am charged to use them. And in so doing, that gives my life meaning. For example, if there was a nuclear war or whatever, and this got buried, and 1,000 years later someone dug it up, and they go, wow, that phone, they don't know what it's a phone yet. So that device would be a really great paperweight, right? And they put it and use it as a paperweight. And sure, that has made meaning of this device. At least it's doing something, not nothing. But what would be the way to realise the true value of this is if they knew it was a phone, and then if you plugged it in, it could do all of these things. In the same way, yes, you could live your life a particular way. But if you live the thing that made you, in the way that you're intended to work, then maybe you could be realising your true value. And in so doing, live a meaningful life. Run the race. Learn the things that are about you that you can use for good. And curiously, it's not talking a lot about how the reward is the finish line. It's the race and the fight itself. The way you race, the fight you fight is more important. That's point number one. He goes on. Next slide, thank you. Now there is in store for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day. And not only to me, but also to all who have longed for his appearing. So we've got the race, we've got the good fight, and at the end of that, we've got a crown, an assured place for all believers. It says, for all who've longed for his appearing, for all who believe, there is an assured crown at the end of it. So that's one of the best things about the Christian worldview that gives your life meaning, is that you know where it's going to end up in the end. That all the good stuff lasts forever because people will still be around to talk about it with. Those relationships that you've built, you'll be able to continue on with. They actually continue. It lasts. It matters. And all the rubbish that you're dealing with, that gets dealt with. All that pain that you have to suffer, that illness that you're going through, that relationship that broke down, and you both kind of just know that you can't deal with it now, but one day you may be able to, because in this place we will reconcile all things. Because there's a crown of righteousness coming. There's an assurance that it all kind of adds up and makes sense and comes together in the end for those who love God. In the African slave issue in America, right, terrifying and terrible situation, but one of the ways slaves managed to get through that time was through the singing of spirituals. And if you were to just take every single one of these songs that they sang and just count how many times they're talking about the next life, the percentage is humongous. You compare it to our Western worship songs now, like 1 in every 1,000 is about the heaven, right? But back then it was like 50% or something are about the life to come. Because when life is really hard, sometimes knowing there's a crown at the end of it is the thing you need to get you through, that you will be okay in the end. So that's the second one. And the third one is a joke, I reckon. It's not really a joke, but I find it funny. Because he's just had, he's dying, he's realising his life is ending, had this deep conversation about the path behind him and the fight he has fought. He's thinking about the crown that's assured him when he dies. And then he says this, which I think is just classic. He says, and do your best to come with me, and when you come, can you bring the cloak I left with Carpus at Troas? And my scrolls, especially the parchments. He's just had this deep and meaningful, he's like, oh, and Timothy, I left my coat. Can you bring that when you come? Or when someone comes, can you just make sure they bring it? I really could do with that coat, it was nice. And my scrolls, particularly, they're really good. I want to see them again, life's ending and I want to edit them one more time before they go to the publisher. And there's something about that I think is so beautiful, because I think sometimes religious people, when they start to kind of have that meaning pondering a bit much, you get a bit of that detachment from life thing going on, where everything you're stepped out of life and are just observing and go, that's just, This is not the way Paul reflects on the meaning of his life in his last days. He is still living in the day. And today, he needs a cloak. And today, your thing that you need right now still matters. Yes, there's a fight that you're fighting, there's a fight that you fought, but today, you need a friend. That's meaningful. You need to go to Macca's after this and eat bad food because it's cheat day or something. You need that. We had waffles this morning. We needed waffles. It was awesome. You need the thing to get you through today. That is part of the meaning. This is the beauty of the meaning of God, is that you have today, I need a cloak. Tomorrow, I'm fighting a fight. And in the day to come, there is a crown. And I'll maybe look at these 3 images. I've got them here for you. Is what do you need today? When you're reflecting on the meaning of your particular life, do you need to think through the lens of the battle that you're facing right now? You're fighting a fight and you need to put the gloves on. Because it's a battle. God never promised that life would be easy. It shouldn't surprise us when life is hard. Life is really hard. My life is actually quite hard, to be honest. I've got some stuff going on at home with my kids that is just hard. One of my kids is quite unwell in his own particular way, and it's just hard. Life is a battle. But what should surprise us is not how hard life is. What should surprise us is how God always gives us what we need to fight that battle. And it might only be a day at a time, but he'll give you the gloves you need to fight for today. And when you finish fighting that day and then you fight the next day and you fight the last one, then you look back and you see, wow, I fought quite a lot of battles. I've fought a good fight. So maybe that's what you need to be reminded of. That God's more interested in how you battle today than in what's going to happen at the finish line. Because guess what? The finish line is assured. We know what the finish line's going to be. We don't need to worry about the finish line. That part is done. We're all going to end up there somehow. We can get through today. Maybe what you just need today is your jacket. You need something right now. Because if you don't get that thing, life's going to feel pretty rotten. If that's what you know, if maybe someone you know is struggling with the whole meaning of everything and they just need a friend today, maybe that's what today matters. You don't just step back and go, yes, the grand scheme of your life. No. Today matters. And so when a Christian says, I have a deeper meaning, this is what they're talking about. When Paul's coming to the end of his life, this is what he's talking about, saying, I see the battle I've fought, I see the place that I'm going, and I see that today really matters. And they're things that only can happen when there's a God. Because if life is all there is, then meaning can only be achieved in the ways we've already talked about. And you may be wondering, how do I know this is true? How does God prove to me that he cares about my meaning? Well, he proved it on the cross. God cares so much that your life be meaningful that he was willing to experience meaninglessness, true separation from God for a moment, so that you may live a meaningful life. How do we know God loves us and cares about our meaning? He died so that you can have a meaning. He died so that everything that good that you do can continue and everything bad that has happened will be sorted out. It's a pretty powerful frame to live your life through. It's how I get through my life, for goodness sakes. I'm sure, I look around the room, I know a lot of you pretty well. I'm sure that's how you get through it too. You think, no, this is hard. But God's with me now. God's been with me throughout. And God will be with me in the end. And so what I'd like to do as we wrap up is I'd like us to say the Lord's Prayer. We did a bit of praying in other languages before. We're going to pray collectively, which is something we don't do very often. I've got the words for it up here because I'm aware that you may not have grown up in church world and have never seen what the Lord's Prayer looks like written down before. This is a traditional version full of the oldie words. I kind of like it. But when you read it, you can see in there all the elements of God wanting to give you a meaningful life. The parts of your life that are in the road, that race you're running, that fight you are fighting. You can see the parts of today, where it is, I need what I need today. And then you can see the parts that are the future, that God will sort it all out in the end. So let's pray this together out loud. I know it's weird, we're going to do it, it's going to be cool. And then I'll pray, and then the band will come up while we all have our eyes closed in this magical thing. Let's do it. Let's read together. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Michael, that was fantastic, as always. Thank you so much for sharing with us. Hey guys, I hope you're getting really excited because we're only a few weeks away from our church camp. I know that I've already started my packing list. I'm very, very keen on getting away together and spending some wonderful time in community. So I hope you're getting excited for that. Guys, I hope you have a blessed week. We look forward to seeing you again soon.